Well, good evening from the News Radio 1120 and 93.7 FM KPNW studios. I am Bill London. How are you? I'm fine. Thanks for asking. I do the wake-up call Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 9 on KPNW, streaming online, by the way, at kpnw.com. And if you like the crazy Oregon news, well, tune in weekday mornings, Monday through Friday. I'll give you a full load of it. All right. Speaking of which, a lot of people have problems with insurance and they have questions. And a lot of times they don't feel like they're getting a straight answer. Well, that's where Sean Sutherland comes in. He is a part of Ask Insurance. As a matter of fact, it's his company. So when you have questions, well, it's in the name, Ask. And you can ask about your insurance. Homeowners, automotive, your medical insurance. What should you do about Medicare? Because we're at that time of year. Which plan do you want? Which plan do you need? Which plans can you afford? So you need to check with Sean Sutherland of Ask Insurance. Pick up the phone. Give him a call. He'd love to hear from you. He said so himself. All right, before we get started, I want to throw a shout out to Steve and Marion. All right, these are a couple of fans of Rick's that recognized me at the, Oakland Tavern. That is in Oakland, Oregon, not Oakland, California. And they were two very nice people. They actually own a glass company down in Roseburg. And they came up and chatted and they said, "Hey, would you tell Rick hi for us?" And I said, "Okay." So Rick, Steve and Marion say hi. By the way, if you've never been to Oakland, Oregon, it was the first incorporated city in Oregon, and it's down in Douglas County. If you're traveling south on I-5, it's exit 140, and if you're traveling north from, say, the Medford area or something like that, then it's exit 142. Great little town. All of the buildings there in the little downtown area are all brick and were built back in the 1880s. Fun place. And lots of little cool shops, and I'll say the Oakland Tavern had some good food. Okay, now let's get to the crazy Oregon news. We'll start with a follow-up. Republican leaders in both Oregon's House and Senate are urging Governor Tina Kotek to quit playing and sign the $4.3 billion transportation package that was passed during the special session that increases, for instance, the gas tax, that doubles the payroll tax, that all Oregonians pay for mass transit. And it also greatly increases fees for just getting a registration or a transfer, even a driver's license. You know, essentially making Oregon more unlivable and, at the very least, more expensive. And now there's growing bipartisan concerns saying that Kotek is stalling. And why? Well, to prevent voters from launching an effort to overturn the tax increases that were approved in the legislation. Now, the governor's office has said, and I'll quote them, "Under state law, the governor has until November 12th to sign the bill." Yeah. As to the bipartisan part, well, two very high-ranking Oregon Democratic senators, Janine Solomon from Hillsborough and Jeff Golden from Ashland, have both written separate letters to Governor Tina Kotek urging her to sign the transportation bill into law, as Jeff Golden said, without further delay. Solomon wrote, "After months of work to bring House Bill 3991 to your desk, many Oregonians are seeking closure on this effort. I respectfully urge you to move forward with your signature without further delay." She won't. Now I'll explain why. The Oregon Senate passed the controversial transportation bill to fund ODOT, the black hole of an agency, over a month ago. Yet the bill remains unsigned on Kotek's desk. Now, the date she signs the bill has zero impact on when the tax increases go into effect, but it does affect voter efforts to put the bill to voters in 2026 through a referendum. So it's goofy Oregon law, but what would you expect? It is Oregon. Leaders of the effort can't start circulating the petition until the bill officially becomes law, which requires the governor to sign it or just allow it to take effect without her signature. Here's the other part of the law that's goofy. By law, people that are collecting signatures to put a referendum on the ballot have 90 days to collect the signature starting the day that the bill passes the legislature. So by the governor stalling to sign it into law, essentially she's going to take 90 days, and by the time she gets around to signing it, well, those folks are going to have somewhere around 47 days. Following up on yet another story. So, Sweet Home is in Lynn County, a very bucolic town up there, right along the Sandy Am River with a couple of reservoirs, and was known for fishing and outdoor recreation. Notice the past tense. So, Sweet Home has preemptively declared a state of emergency ahead of the Army Corps of Engineers' plans to conduct, yes, water drawdowns again at the reservoirs up and around Sweet Home, including Green Peter Dam and Lookout Point. And that's going to be coming up a little bit later this fall and continue into winter. Now, if you recall, last year's drawdown increased water turbidity and severely damaged the city's water treatment system. And people that were living there on city water and even on wells all of a sudden discovered they had hot and cold running lake scum coming out of their faucets. It's going to happen again. So Jason Ogden is the Sweet Home city manager, and he said that they declared the emergency early so they could be proactive. Now, the drawdowns are part of a broader effort to hypothetically aid the migration of salmon as mandated by the infamous 2024 biological opinion. Now, that opinion was actually a court order, and it was because of a lawsuit from radical environmentalist groups who have been doing everything they can to try and breach dams in Oregon, regardless of the effects on people. So, the operations mandated by the suit have now raised a different type of environmental concern and also economic concerns within Sweet Home and other cities downriver, like, for instance, Albany. The operations mandated by the suit have a pretty significant effect. According to Ogden, he said, quote, "There was a very significant healthy population of kokanee, a landlocked salmon, and when they did the drawdown, every single one of those fish died." Ogden said, "Our wildlife and resources are important and necessary to protect, just not at the cost of clean drinking water and impacting a community's economy as well as people's health. Because hot and cold running sludge probably isn't good for you." The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, though, assured communities that the operations will be adjusted based on real-time data, and they say if turbidity levels rise to concerning levels, they're prepared to modify and halt the drawdown as they did last year. Note that I said last year's drawdown severely damaged the city's water system. Great. I'm sure everybody's feeling really good about this and safer now. Anyway, as Sweet Home braces for the upcoming drawdown, city leaders are emphasizing the need for an actual sustainable solution that safeguards the public health and the environment, not just the limited part of the environment that the environmentalists are interested in. And when those kokanee died, well, a lot of tourism went with it because it was considered to be one of the best kokanee fisheries in the state. And by the way, those are not hatchery fish. They're native. Oregon Governor Tina Kotek signed Executive Order 2526 this week, directing state agencies to accelerate climate resilience efforts across public lands, farms, forests, and waterways. Now, the executive order commits the state to, in her words, protect an additional 10% of climate resilient lands and waters over the next decade, and they want agencies to expand restoration projects and, of course, mandate that landowners use climate-friendly practices. According to Kotek, this measure will unlock the incredible promise and power of our natural working lands. And, of course, environmentalist groups were all clapping, saying it's a critical step forward for resilience and economic well-being. But the critics warn the order will impose new costs and oversight on private landowners. The definition of the most climate-resilient lands, what does that mean? Nobody knows, except, well, those that work with a laundry list of state agencies that are going to be a part of this. Yes, it's going to be a full Oregon government effort. And the executive order, which you would think, oh, okay, mandating climate resiliency, what does that mean? You would think it would be a short executive order. No, it's 10 pages. And they're not double-spaced. So, climate resilient lands. Well, rural residents are obviously worrying that the initiative is going to shift control of working lands to bureaucrats, which Democrats in Oregon have been trying to do for years and more or less are achieving. But, you know, there's those pesky private lands out there that, well, doggone it, we need to legislate and make mandates on those landowners of working lands. And according to farmers, timber operators, and rural economies, the shift signals a growing push by state government to intervene in both land and water use under the banner of climate resiliency. And while you might think, well, okay, climate resiliency, yeah, I guess if you're going to start clearing some brush and maybe doing some, preemptive burns, that would be good for wildfire risk, but what's all the rest of it? In other words, all of a sudden, people are worried about their property rights, the economic burdens, which, of course, your overlords in state government could care less about, and also they worry about the balance between public conservation goals and private landowner interests. Now, the agencies also are going to be reporting biennially, which will offer limited windows for any public scrutiny as the implementation actually begins. Okay, let's look at Portland, because they're always fun. And this has to do with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Now, last Friday, we had reported, they'd said that, yeah, the National Guard troops can go to Oregon. A 3-judge panel voted 2-1 to say, yeah, President Trump can send those troops in. Well, the Ninth Circuit did an about-face last Friday and paused the decision, adding yet another delay to the president's desired deployment of the National Guard to Portland. Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield said this means for now, both our TROs, temporary restraining orders, preventing the National Guard deployment remain in effect. In a 2-sentence order, 2 sentences, Senior Circuit Judge Sidney Thomas paused the previous order, which sided with the federal administration's efforts to deploy a couple of hundred Oregon National Guard troops to Portland, and effectively, stopped it. So Monday's order threw out the first of the 2 temporary restraining orders that were issued by Judge Karen Immergut, and then the Friday decision put them in effect again. And right now, part of the reason is because they're taking more time to decide whether they're going to reconsider the order formally with an 11-judge panel called an en banc review, as opposed to just the 3-judge panel. Now, a little bit factoring into this was that there were recently uncovered documents that proved pretty graphically that federal officers being assigned to the ICE facility were actually less than, well, the Fed's attorneys had said. Quite a few less. And that likely had something to do with it. So we're supposed to find out soon whether an 11-judge panel is going to review all of this and whether you will see Oregon National Guard troops in Portland. However, you can pretty much bet that there are still other multiple active legal proceedings regarding all of this, and you can expect more stays. Also, a trial centered on the president's ability to deploy the Guard. An actual trial is going to get underway Wednesday in front of Judge Immergut. This is a lot of follow-up stories today. Okay, if you recall, we told you about how the Department of Corrections was all of a sudden redoing the math on people who were sentenced to prison here in Oregon by judges and essentially letting them out of jail way early. And in some cases, with the way the calculations work, which I'm going to explain here in a minute, they're set up to where a lot of people that are convicted of crimes won't ever see prison. Let me explain. The lawyer for the victim of a child sex abuser who was released from prison 4 years early on Friday called the Oregon Department of Corrections to return the man to prison. Now, that is attorney Jose Cienfuegos, and he referred to the release of Joaquin Cowart, a 47-year-old, and said it was unlawful. And he accused the Corrections Department of misinterpreting an Oregon Supreme Court ruling over the summer that dealt with the calculus of prison sentencing. In a letter to Corrections Director Michael Reese, Cienfuegos asked the department to stop any additional early releases and return people to custody who've already been released under the agency's revised calculations. Cienfuegos' client is now 29 years old and lives in Jackson County. She was 11 years old at the time that Cowart sexually abused her. And by the way, he was a known sex offender at that time. Cienfuegos sent letters as well to Attorney General Dan Rayfield and Governor Tina Kotek, and of course hasn't heard back. And he's objecting to the way the Oregon Department of Corrections is applying the Oregon Supreme Court ruling. A corrections spokesperson, Harvey Matthews, said the agency, quote, has no legal authority to return an offender to custody without a court order. Matthews said the original judgment in Cowart's case clearly showed the court applied time served to each count, which they didn't. We'll get to that. There's more. Cienfuegos' demand comes after revelations that the Oregon Department of Corrections started re-examining quietly the sentences of most of the state prisoners in light of that Supreme Court ruling. And the agency, in many cases, have been shaving years off of a prisoner's time and releasing people outright without alerting prosecutors or crime victims, which legally they're supposed to do. But they're a state agency. The massive review led to earlier release dates so far for 350 prisoners, including 40 who were immediately released. And we're not talking about minor offenders here. Like in this case, we're talking about a child rapist. Well, actually, a little more than that. We'll get to that in a second, too. We're also talking about murderers. rapists, child abusers, violent criminals. So Cowart, here's how this worked out. Cowart was sentenced in 2021 for sexually abusing a child and, taking pictures of it. So child porn too. He was sentenced to 4 3-year consecutive sentences, or 12 years in prison. 12 years. Now, the Department of Corrections applied 3.5 years of jail time he spent in jail before trial and before his sentencing. And they applied the 3.5 years time to each one of those 4 consecutive counts and sentences. So 3.5 years times 4 is more than 12 years. So essentially, they just let him out. Now, according to Cienfuegos, and he makes a good point, absolutely no one would believe that a judge would sentence a repeat sex offender to 4 36-month sentences only to apply credit for time served sufficient to reduce the period of incarceration to less than 2 days in prison. Cienfuegos wrote, yet that is precisely what the DOC found. He accused corrections officials of recalculating Cowart's sentence and releasing him, not only without consulting the judge and the prosecutor, but also the victim. Governor Kotek, while defending the releases, says the agency, for the time being, is pausing applying the court ruling to sentences to give time to prosecutors and courts to enter judgments to spell out sentences for specific defendants. How magnanimous. And what about the rest that have already been released? Rapists, sexual offenders, murderers. This is why it's called Crazy Oregon News. And also this. This comes to us from Corvallis. If you're not familiar with it, that's where Oregon State University happens to be. And the Corvallis School District is facing a budget shortfall of $4 million. This is after last year's new union contract gave teachers 15% in salary increases and other bennies. So, $4.5 million in the hole. How do you suppose they'll respond to the hole? Well, the school district board says, let's close Sheldon Middle School and Letitia Carson Elementary Schools. Concerned parents are not happy. That means that 900 students are going to be relocated. And the parents say the district isn't following best practice procedures as laid out by the Oregon Parent-Teacher Association. Parents are also concerned how their kids are going to struggle going into new classrooms and communities. Families located in Letitia Carson, which is a Title I school, and the Sheldon district say that closing these schools unfairly targets low-income families. The Corvallis School District is going to be having a series of feedback sessions to hear from the public on just exactly what they think about it. All right, there is your Crazy Oregon News. Rick, it is now time for you to roll out a big old industrial-sized drum of real. And by the way, you're going to have to be choosing your Medicare coming up here real soon. If you've got questions, ask Insurance and Sean Sutherland. Take it away, Rick.